This story is not just about a crime. It's about fear, faith, and the silence between two truths. Maplewood Lane wasn't known for noise. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset, where families left their front doors unlocked during Ramadan, and where the same residents had lived for decades. Most knew each other by name, if not by story. But in March 2023, that quiet was disrupted. Her name was Avery Lane. She was 29, moved in with just 2 suitcases and a cat named Midnight. Nobody knew much about her. She had a soft voice, dyed red hair, and a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. To some, she was just another new neighbor. To others, she was something else entirely. Directly across from Avery lived Imam Khalid Rahman, a 52-year-old religious leader at the neighborhood's most respected mosque. He wasn't loud, nor was he political. A man of quiet strength and scripture, Khalid had guided the local Muslim community for nearly 20 years. He was the kind of person neighbors turned to when their son got into trouble, or when a marriage was breaking apart. His home was small, modest, always smelling of coffee and books. His wife passed away 6 years ago. He lived alone now except for his sermons and routines. When Avery moved in, Khalid didn't think much of it. She smiled. He nodded. That was all. But the street had started whispering. It began with a neighborhood board meeting on a cloudy Tuesday evening in early April. The small community center was packed. Mostly older couples, a few young families, and Khalid sitting near the back with his prayer beads in hand. The agenda was simple. Fence repairs, parking disputes, and a brief complaint someone had filed anonymously about inappropriate behavior and identity confusion. No names were mentioned, but all eyes turned subtly but unmistakably toward Avery. She sat near the door, shoulders tense, legs crossed, wearing a long denim jacket and earbuds half tucked under her red hair. She didn't speak. One neighbor, Mrs. Dahlia Fidel, tried to redirect the conversation. She pays rent. She's quiet. She's polite. That's all that matters. But someone else muttered under their breath. Not quite loud enough to be heard, but loud enough to hurt. Avery stood up quietly. I don't want to cause trouble, she said, voice low. She left before the meeting ended. One neighbor followed her out and saw her wiping her eyes in the dark. That Friday something changed. Imam Khalid stood at the pulpit of the mosque, wearing his usual gray robe, his voice strong but calm. But his sermon felt different. He spoke about the decline of morality in modern times, about confusion in identity, about rejecting the nature Allah has blessed us with. He never said her name, not once, but it hung in the air, unspoken and heavy. Some nodded in agreement. Others sat quietly, eyes down. And outside, in her small rental house across the street, Avery listened. She wasn't Muslim, but she knew the rhythm of that Friday sermon. She had begun to feel its aim. Avery had always known that being herself came at a cost. Her move to Dearborn was supposed to be a fresh start. Cheaper rent, quiet life, away from her past in Detroit. But she underestimated how loud silence could be. She started keeping a journal. April 7th. I don't belong here. They don't say it out loud, but I can feel it. Even the air feels different now. April 10th. I saw him again, the man across the street. The imam. He looked at me like he wanted to say something. Or maybe he wanted me gone. April 13th. A firework went off outside my window last night. Or maybe it wasn't a firework. One morning, Avery found an envelope taped to her door. No name. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, typed in bold. You are what's wrong with this country. A week later, another note. You are not welcome here. Not in this body. Not on this street. She never showed the letters to police. She just folded them and slid them into the back of her journal. But they weighed on her, heavier than any sermon, heavier than any stare. Across the street, Khalid was also restless. His sermons were reaching ears beyond the mosque. The youth were asking questions, dangerous questions, and part of him wasn't sure he was helping. He prayed longer, walked slower, spoke less, One evening, after prayer, he walked past Avery's house on his way back from the store. She was sitting on the porch steps, smoking. Their eyes met. She didn't look away. "Evening," she said softly. He hesitated, then nodded. "Evening." She smiled faintly. "Nice weather." It was a meaningless exchange, but something inside him shifted. He saw her not as a symbol, not as a sermon, but as a person. On Maplewood Lane, two people sat across from each other. Both misunderstood, both judged. One by the community, the other by his conscience. But neither knew how close they were to something irreversible, something tragic. This is how fear spreads, not through storms, but through shadows. And on Maplewood Lane, those shadows were growing longer. After the Friday sermon, something subtle shifted in the community. You couldn't quite see it in the streets, but you could feel it in the air, a kind of hesitation, like people choosing different sidewalks at the last second. Avery still walked to the corner store every afternoon, still greeted the older woman next door, still smiled at the mailman. But fewer people smiled back now. And more than once, she noticed curtains falling closed just as she passed by. What Avery didn't know, and what Khaled didn't realize until too late, was that a private neighborhood WhatsApp group had started buzzing the night after the sermon. It wasn't openly cruel. At first, someone wrote, "We have to protect our children from confusing examples." Another added, "This is why our values are under threat. Starts like this." A third, "And our imam is too soft. He's just talking. We need action." By the end of the week, dozens of messages had stacked. Nobody named Avery, but everybody knew who they meant. Imam Khaled read some of those messages, forwarded by a concerned youth leader. His heart dropped. He didn't like where it was heading. This wasn't just about disagreement now, it was turning into something uglier and dangerously personal. He sat at his desk late one night, the Quran open before him, but the words blurred. All he could think about was the woman across the street, and the weight of his own voice. Had he started this? Had his words been twisted? Or had they always carried a sharp edge that he just never heard before? On a gray Wednesday evening, Khaled made a decision he never thought he would make. He crossed the street. Avery was watering the small rose bush near her porch. She stiffened when she saw him. Her face tightened. "Can we talk?" he asked. She studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. They sat on opposite ends of her porch. Not close, but not angry, just cautious. "I didn't expect a visit," she said. "I didn't expect to make one," Khaled replied, folding his hands in his lap. There was silence. Then, softly, Avery added, "You don't have to say it. I know what people think." "I didn't come to accuse," he said quickly. "I came to understand." She looked at him, then really looked. And for the first time, she saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Doubt. They talked for 20 minutes. She told him about her transition, her family, her loneliness, how hard it had been to find a place where she could just exist without stares and whispers. Khaled didn't argue, but he didn't reassure her either. He only said, "You are someone's child. That matters." When he left, she didn't smile. But she watched him walk all the way across the street before going inside. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She just sat by the window and watched the rain. But while Khaled tried to calm the tide, others were stirring it up. One young man, Tariq, 19, passionate and headstrong, had been sharing clips from radical preachers online. Videos that described people like Avery as diseased, corrupt, tools of Western moral collapse. He posted one with the caption, "Our imam won't act. Maybe someone else should." Khaled saw the post. His blood chilled. The next morning, he stood in front of his youth group and said firmly, "If anyone thinks hatred is the answer, they are further from Allah than the one they hate." It was brave. It was necessary. But it came too late. A week after the porch conversation, Avery heard a loud bang outside her window around midnight. She dropped her mug. It shattered on the kitchen floor. Running to the front door, she opened it slowly. On the lawn, charred grass, burnt paper. Someone had thrown a firework or maybe something stronger. It didn't hit the house, but it was close enough to send a message. She stood there barefoot in her pajamas, the wind tugging at her hair. Her cat meowed from the hallway, and then she saw it. A figure across the street, standing in the shadows near the mosque gate, watching. That morning, Avery walked into the local precinct and filed a harassment report. She didn't name anyone.
No suspects. No accusations.
Just the facts. Threatening notes, property damage, growing fear. The officer listened politely, took notes, promised to look into it. But by that afternoon, word had spread. Someone, maybe from the board, maybe a cop's cousin, told a neighbor. That neighbor told another. And soon the entire WhatsApp group buzzed with a new rumor. She went to the police about us. Khaled heard the news the next day. He paced the prayer room alone, wringing his hands. What started as discomfort had become fear. And now it was something more dangerous, division. He feared for Avery, but also for his own community spinning out of control. What was his role in this? He hadn't told anyone to act. He hadn't preached hate. But in his silence or in his subtleties, had he planted seeds of harm? That night he prayed long after midnight, not for answers, but for mercy, for himself, for Avery, and for the boy he feared might already be lost. 2 days later, Avery stepped out of her house to take out the trash when a voice behind her called out. "You don't belong here." She turned. It was Tariq, the teenage boy from the youth group. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight. "You think you can just come in here and change everything?" "I'm not changing anything," she replied. "I'm just trying to live. You made the imam weak. You made everyone scared to speak the truth." She didn't answer. She just looked at him, and something in her silence shook him. He walked away, but not far, and not for long. The following evening, Khaled visited Avery again. He brought tea. This time she let him in. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For everything I didn't stop. For everything I let grow." She nodded slowly. "You're not a bad man, Imam," she said. "But you live among people who believe bad things. And they listen to you, whether you mean it or not." He looked at her, eyes wet. "I'm learning," she smiled. "Just barely." "So am I." They sat in her living room, quiet. Outside, someone walked by the window, unnoticed, watching. Again, one man tried to bridge the divide. One woman tried to endure it. But in the silence between them, a storm was already forming. And what came next, no one was ready for. When fear takes root in the soil of misunderstanding, it doesn't grow quietly. It festers. And even when peace is offered, even when hands reach across the divide, there's always someone who sees reconciliation as betrayal. What happened next on Maplewood Lane wasn't just a crime. It was the collapse of a fragile truce and the breaking point of two lives. Friday prayers came again. The mosque was full. Dozens of men sat on woven rugs, their eyes fixed on Imam Khaled as he stepped forward. He had rewritten his sermon that morning 3 times. He wanted to speak about mercy, about community, about what it meant to truly protect one another. But his hands trembled at the podium. He felt the tension in the room, the whispers that had followed him all week. Why is he protecting her? Why doesn't he say her name? He's too soft. But Khaled only raised his voice slightly and spoke clearly. When fear guides your faith, it is no longer faith. It is poison. Some nodded. Others stood and left, quietly but intentionally. Among them was Tariq. Back in her small home, Avery kept her blinds drawn. The last few days had exhausted her. She barely slept. She barely ate. Even midnight, her black cat paced more than usual. She hadn't told her friends in Detroit what was happening. She didn't want to hear, "I told you so." But every night, she scribbled notes in her journal. Words she couldn't say aloud. April 23rd. I feel like I'm standing in a house made of glass. Everyone can see in, and they're waiting for it to shatter. She started locking her doors during the day. She placed her pepper spray by the window. She rehearsed what she would say if something happened. That weekend, Khaled was summoned to a mosque board meeting. The elders, mostly conservative men in their 60s and 70s, sat around a long table. Their tone wasn't aggressive. It was worse, disappointed. One said, "You're losing the youth." Another added, "We're not asking you to attack her, but your silence has created confusion." And then the final blow came. "If you can't lead us clearly, maybe you shouldn't lead us at all." Khaled sat quietly, then stood. "I serve Allah, not your comfort." And with that, he walked out, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Meanwhile, the harassment report Avery had filed began to circulate beyond the neighborhood. Online forums picked it up. A conservative YouTube channel misrepresented it, painting Avery as a provocateur targeting a religious community. The video got over 50,000 views in 48 hours. Comments flooded in. "She's doing this for attention. The imam is weak. Somebody needs to make her leave." Avery didn't see the video, but Tariq did. And in his young, furious mind, it confirmed everything. On April 25th, just after 9 p.m., Avery heard a knock on her door. She froze. Midnight hissed from the hallway. Another knock, firmer. She walked slowly to the window and peeked through the blinds. No one. But when she opened the door, a small box sat on her front step. Inside was a single piece of paper, torn from a Quran. And when they deviate, Allah lets their hearts deviate. Surah As-Saf, 61:5. Nothing else. No name. No fingerprints. She closed the door and cried for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Khaled returned. This time, he didn't bring tea. His eyes were dark with worry. His voice softer than before. "They've twisted everything," he said. "I tried, but I was too late." Avery opened the door wider and let him in. They sat on the floor as equals. For the first time, Khaled opened up about the pressures, the expectations, the decades of belief he was now beginning to question. "I don't know what's right anymore," he admitted. Avery said quietly, "Maybe it's not about being right. Maybe it's just about not causing harm." He nodded, and for the briefest moment, there was peace in the room. But outside, across the street, Tariq watched from behind a parked car, eyes wide with betrayal. Tariq went home that night and didn't speak to anyone. His mother thought he was studying. His father was working a double shift. Nobody noticed the tabs open on his laptop. Videos filled with rage, scripture twisted into violence, calls to action. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. "You are the sword," one video repeated. "When your leaders fail, the blade must speak." Tariq wasn't evil. He was lost, and someone, somewhere, had handed him a map to hell. On April 27th, Avery wrote her final journal entry. "He came again today. The imam. He's not the monster I thought. Maybe none of them are. Maybe they're just scared. Like me. I don't know what happens next, but I want to believe that kindness wins." She left the journal on her nightstand. She curled up on the couch, exhausted. Midnight jumped up beside her. She closed her eyes, and at that moment, someone crossed the street. She had finally begun to hope. He had finally begun to change. And yet, one door left unlocked, one moment unguarded, and the storm they both feared finally arrived. What happened next would haunt Dearborn forever. Sometimes they come with a knock at the door, and a silence so thick, it swallows the entire street. On Maplewood Lane, the storm finally broke. And in the ruins it left behind were shattered lives, broken faith, and a single unanswered question. Why? It happened sometime between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. on April 28th. The neighborhood was asleep. Streetlights flickered. Wind rustled the branches above Avery's porch. Inside her home, everything was still. Midnight, the cat was curled on the arm of the sofa. Avery, exhausted from days of fear, had finally fallen into a deep sleep. Then a sound. Footsteps on gravel. The screen door creaked. and suddenly the crack of shattered glass. At 5:47 a.m., a jogger named Mina Khan passed by Avery's house and froze. She noticed the door hanging open, the porch light still on, a faint trail of red on the concrete. She stepped closer and gasped. Avery was lying near the steps, half conscious, bleeding from her side, her shirt soaked, her face pale, her breathing shallow, her voice barely a whisper. Mina dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "There's blood," she cried. "She's been attacked. Please hurry. She's still alive." Avery was rushed to Beaumont Hospital, unconscious but clinging to life. She had been stabbed twice, once in the abdomen, once under her rib cage. Her hand was also cut, likely from trying to defend herself. Surgeons worked quickly. She coded once on the table, but was brought back. She remained in a coma for 2 days. Police secured her home, cordoned off the yard, collected evidence. A single word was scrawled on her living room wall, in black marker, written fast and uneven: "Deviant." Detectives canvassed the area. They questioned neighbors, searched doorbell camera footage, and pulled every local phone ping from 3 to 4 a.m. Khaled was questioned first. He gave a full account, the tea visits, the conversations, the warning signs. "I feared something like this," he said. "I should have done more." He was released after 3 hours. His alibi checked out. But then a breakthrough came from a motion-activated camera 2 houses down. It captured a hooded figure entering Avery's property at 3:12 a.m., leaving 7 minutes later. The figure limped slightly. The jacket had a torn shoulder. Police enhanced the video. They showed it to mosque leaders. And one of them whispered, "That's Tariq." Tariq was arrested at 10:32 p.m. on April 30th, in his bedroom. When officers entered, they found a blood-stained hoodie stuffed under his bed, a knife, half cleaned, with traces of Avery's DNA, a notebook filled with angry scripture, hateful rants, and chilling entries like, "The blade must speak for those too afraid to." At first, he denied everything, then broke down. "She was corrupting us," he said, "and he, the imam, let her. So I did what no one else had the courage to." He was 19. Now facing attempted murder, hate crime charges, and the full weight of a city's outrage. News of the attack spread quickly. Local outlets covered it first, then regional news, then national, then international. Headlines read, "Trans woman brutally stabbed in Dearborn hate attack. Mosque youth leader arrested after assault. Imam under fire for indirect influence." Protests erupted outside the mosque. Counter-protests followed. Police were called to separate the crowds. And at the center of it all was Avery, still unconscious, still silent. Khaled stood before his congregation that Friday, the mosque half full. Some had turned away from him. Others came hoping for clarity. His voice was softer than ever. "I failed," he said, "not because I said the wrong thing, but because I did not say enough. Hate grows in silence, and when we mistake fear for morality, we leave the door open for evil." Some wept, others walked out, but for once he didn't chase them. He just bowed his head and prayed for forgiveness. On May 2nd, Avery opened her eyes. Her first words were barely audible. "Where's my cat?" She remembered almost nothing from that night. Only a flash of movement, a stabbing pain, a voice, maybe Tariq's, whispering scripture like a curse. She asked if she would walk again. The doctors weren't sure, but she smiled through the oxygen mask. Still here. Khaled visited her in the hospital 2 days later. He asked for permission first. She nodded. He brought no books, no lectures. Just a small rose from the bush she used to water, now growing wild in her yard. They spoke little, but as he stood to leave, Avery said, "You tried. That's more than most." He replied, voice shaking, "I didn't try soon enough." On June 10th, Avery left Dearborn. She didn't want to, not really. But the stares, the media, the whispers, it was too much. She moved to Ann Arbor, started therapy, joined a support group. Her cat Midnight came with her, So did her journal. But she never reopened it. That chapter's closed, she told a friend. But I survived it. That's enough. Khaled remained in Dearborn. His sermons changed. They became more personal, more protective, more inclusive. He lost members, but gained others, families who had felt judged, youth who had felt silenced. He never mentioned Avery again by name. But one Friday, months later, he ended a sermon with, "When the prophet, PBUH, met the woman who was reviled, he offered water, not stones. So who are we to do less?" This wasn't a story about good versus evil. This was a story about misunderstanding, about fear, about what happens when people refuse to see each other fully. Avery Lane survived, but she lost her peace. Imam Khalid changed, but too late to stop the blade. And Dearborn, once a city of quiet streets, now lives with the echo of a silence that nearly killed.